Two cops target a 90-year-old black veteran at a diner, mocking him, humiliating him, until he makes one phone call to the Pentagon. Within hours, the entire nation learns the truth, and the mayor himself ends up in handcuffs. What happened inside that diner will leave you speechless. The morning sun spilled gently across the quiet streets of Montgomery, Alabama. Inside a small, old-fashioned diner, the comforting scent of bacon, eggs, and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Sitting at a corner booth was Henry Jefferson, a 90-year-old black man with kind eyes, a strong posture, and a face lined with the wisdom of decades. Though he appeared like any other elderly man enjoying his breakfast, Henry carried a history few knew. He was a decorated veteran, a man who had fought in wars overseas and had served his country with honor. Henry adjusted his worn-out cap that bore the faded insignia of his old military unit. For him, this diner wasn't just about food, it was about routine, about peace. He came here every Wednesday morning, ordered black coffee with 2 sugars, scrambled eggs, and a side of grits. The waitress, Linda, always greeted him warmly, knowing he was one of her most loyal customers. But this morning would be different. The bell above the diner door jingled, and in walked 2 uniformed police officers, Officer Brad Miller and Officer Todd Simmons. They scanned the room with suspicious eyes, their gaze settling on Henry. Without hesitation, they strode toward his table. "Sir, we need to see some ID," Officer Miller said sternly, his hand resting near his holstered weapon. Henry looked up slowly, confused but calm. "ID? I'm just here to eat my breakfast." The officers exchanged glances. Something about the old man seemed to irritate them. Other diners fell silent, forks and knives pausing mid-air. Linda froze behind the counter, her hand gripping a coffee pot tightly. Henry sighed, sensing the storm brewing. He didn't know why these cops had targeted him, but he knew one thing for certain: they had chosen the wrong man to intimidate. The silence in the diner grew heavy, every eye fixed on the confrontation unfolding. Officer Simmons leaned closer to Henry's booth, his voice sharper than before. "We've had reports of a suspicious man hanging around here. Matches your description," he said, narrowing his eyes. Henry's fork paused above his plate. "Suspicious?" he repeated, his tone steady. "Son, the only thing suspicious about me is how I still enjoy grits at my age." A few diners chuckled nervously, but the officers didn't smile. Miller placed his hand firmly on the table. "We're not joking. Hand over your ID or we'll take you down to the station." Linda, unable to stay silent, stepped forward. "Officers, this is Mr. Henry Jefferson. He's been eating here for years. He's no threat to anyone." "Ma'am, stay out of this," Simmons barked, his voice echoing across the diner. Henry, calm but firm, reached into his pocket and slid his worn leather wallet across the table. "There, my ID. Now maybe you'll let me finish my breakfast." Miller snatched it up, reading the name aloud. "Henry Jefferson, 90 years old," he scoffed. "That can't be right." "It's right," Henry replied, locking eyes with the officer. His voice carried the weight of discipline and experience. "I've lived long enough to know when I'm being harassed." The tension thickened. A young man at another table muttered, "Leave him alone," but quickly fell silent under the officer's glare. Simmons leaned closer, smirking. "Doesn't matter who you are, old man. If we say you're suspicious, you're suspicious." Henry's jaw tightened. He took a deep breath, realizing this was no ordinary misunderstanding. These officers weren't here for justice. They were here for power. And Henry Jefferson had faced far worse men with far more power in his lifetime. Henry sat still, the diner's silence pressing in on him as the officers loomed. The smell of bacon and coffee now mingled with tension so thick you could almost taste it. He looked at the badge on Officer Miller's chest, then at Simmons's smirk. For a moment, Henry wasn't in the diner anymore. His mind drifted back to 1951, to the mud-soaked fields of Korea. He remembered nights filled with gunfire, the sound of men calling out for medics, the weight of responsibility as he led his platoon through ambushes. He had faced fear, chaos, and hatred in its rawest form, and survived. Snapping back to the present, Henry studied the 2 young men before him. They were arrogant, reckless, and blind to the truth of who sat in front of them. He wasn't just a 90-year-old man, he was a war hero, a survivor, a man who had bled for the flag they wore on their uniforms. Linda noticed Henry's distant look. "Mr. Jefferson, are you all right?" she asked softly. Henry gave a faint smile. "I've dealt with worse, Linda, much worse." Miller frowned, growing impatient. "Don't play games, old man. What are you doing here? Who are you meeting? Tell us the truth." Henry leaned back, his voice deep and unwavering. "The truth? The truth is I came here for breakfast, same as every week. The truth is you're harassing a man who's done more for this country than you can even imagine. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but Simmons shook his head dismissively. Save your stories. Nobody's buying it. Henry's patience was thinning. He'd given them respect. He'd given them answers. Now his thoughts turned towards something he hadn't wanted to consider in decades, calling in the kind of favor only a man with his past could summon. The diner had never been so silent. The clink of silverware had stopped, and even the coffee pot on the warmer hissed louder than the conversations that used to fill the room. Every customer's eyes were locked on Henry Jefferson and the two cops hovering over him. Officer Miller crossed his arms, impatience written all over his face. "We've got enough to bring you in. You can explain yourself at the station." Henry didn't move. He stirred his coffee calmly, as though their threats were nothing more than background noise. His steady hands and unshaken demeanor unsettled Miller and Simmons more than they cared to admit. Linda, her voice trembling but fierce, stepped out from behind the counter. "You're making a mistake. This man is a veteran, a good man. Everyone here knows him. If you drag him out of here, you'll regret it." Simmons smirked. "Lady, the only one making mistakes is you, for sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." A young man in a hoodie near the door finally spoke up. "He's right, y'all are out of line. I see Mr. Jefferson here every week." His courage sparked murmurs of agreement around the room. People shifted in their seats, uneasy but supportive. Henry raised his hand gently, silencing the whispers. His eyes were sharp now, no longer softened by age. "I've kept quiet out of respect," he said slowly, his voice carrying authority. "But if you put your hands on me again, you'll be making a call you're not ready for." The officers exchanged a confused glance. Simmons scoffed. "What call?" Henry leaned back, his lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile. "The kind of call that can change your entire career in 60 seconds. The tension crackled in the air. Nobody knew what he meant, but Henry Jefferson wasn't bluffing. Officer Simmons chuckled, shaking his head as if Henry's words were a joke. "Change our careers? Old man, the only career ending today will be yours." He leaned in close, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. Officer Miller, however, wasn't laughing. There was something unsettling about the calm in Henry's voice. He'd seen plenty of suspects get loud, get angry, but Henry's silence, his poise, it wasn't the kind of defiance Miller was used to. It was the calm of someone who had seen worse storms. Linda stepped closer to the booth, her fists clenched. "You don't know who you're talking to," she warned, her voice carrying both fear and pride. Henry finally set down his fork and napkin with deliberate precision. His eyes locked on the officers. "When I was 20 years old, I was commanding men in battle, while you were nothing more than a thought in your daddy's head. Don't mistake my age for weakness." The diner patrons stirred, whispers rippling like a wave. Some pulled out their phones, recording the encounter. The cops shifted uneasily. Social media was the last thing they wanted. Simmons slammed his palm on the table, trying to reassert control. "Enough. You're coming with us now." He reached for Henry's arm, and that was the moment Henry's demeanor shifted. His eyes sharpened, his voice low but thunderous. "Touch me again, and I'll make one phone call, one call that will bring people down here you're not ready to meet." The words hung in the air like a grenade waiting to explode. Even Miller hesitated, his hand frozen mid-reach. Henry leaned back, his expression unshaken. "Boys, I don't threaten, I promise." The diner was no longer just a restaurant, it was a battlefield. The diner buzzed with nervous energy. Patrons leaned in, whispering to one another, phones discreetly raised to capture the unfolding drama. For the first time, Officer Miller's confidence seemed to falter. "Who exactly are you supposed to call?" he asked, his voice carrying less authority than before. Henry Jefferson's steady gaze didn't waver. "I spent 40 years serving this country. Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War. I've bled on foreign soil so that men like you could wear that badge." His voice grew heavier, each word deliberate. "And while you were learning how to write parking tickets, I was building friendships with men who now run the Pentagon." The room fell silent. Simmons scoffed, though his smirk seemed forced. "You expect us to believe some dusty old vet has the Pentagon on speed dial?" Henry reached into his jacket pocket and carefully pulled out a weathered leather case. Inside was an ID card few had ever seen, a Department of Defense clearance badge, its hologram catching the diner's dull lights. Gasps rippled across the room. Linda's jaw dropped. "Mr. Jefferson, I never knew." Henry gave a small, almost sorrowful smile. "I don't talk about it. Not because I can't, but because I've seen enough war for 10 lifetimes. I came here to eat in peace, not to relive battles. Miller swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if the badge was still valid, but something about it, and the man holding it, felt undeniably real. Henry slid the badge back into his pocket, then placed his weathered hand on the diner's payphone sitting by the wall. I suggest you think very carefully before I make this call, because once I do, there's no going back. The diner held its breath. The phone was inches away, and everyone knew Henry Jefferson meant business. The diner's silence felt like a held breath. Everyone's eyes flicked between Henry Jefferson's steady hand near the payphone and the two officers who, despite their swagger, seemed increasingly unsettled. Officer Simmons scoffed, but his voice cracked with irritation. Enough of this game, old man. Pentagon, generals, war stories, it's all smoke. You think flashing a dusty badge is going to scare us? He reached down and grabbed Henry's arm roughly. The scrape of chair legs against tile echoed through the room as people gasped. A woman at the counter whispered, "Don't touch him." Henry didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly turned his head, locking eyes with Simmons. His voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "Son, that was your last mistake." In a single deliberate motion, Henry stood, his tall frame surprisingly steady for his 90 years. His presence filled the diner, commanding silence like a general walking into formation. He brushed Simmons's hand away with ease, then stepped toward the payphone on the wall. "Mr. Jefferson, wait!" Linda's voice cracked. Her heart pounded. She knew something big was about to happen. Henry lifted the receiver, his weathered fingers dialing numbers he hadn't pressed in decades, but numbers burned into his memory. The diner patrons leaned forward, barely breathing. Miller's face drained of color. "Hold on. Who are you calling?" Henry pressed the final digit. He held the phone to his ear, and after 2 rings a voice answered on the other end. A voice crisp, formal, and heavy with authority. "Pentagon, Office of the Joint Chiefs." Every head in the diner snapped toward Henry. He didn't blink. "This is Colonel Henry Jefferson, United States Army, retired. Put me through to General Lawson. Tell him it's urgent." The room erupted in stunned silence. Simmons's smirk vanished. Miller's jaw dropped, and Henry, calm as ever, waited for the line to transfer. The diner felt frozen in time. Every customer leaned in, straining to hear Henry's side of the conversation. The hum of the ceiling fan, the hiss of the coffee machine, everything faded into silence. The line clicked, and then came a firm, commanding voice. "Jefferson? Henry Jefferson? My God, it's been years. This is General Lawson. What's happening?" Henry straightened, his tone crisp, soldier-like. "General, I wish I was calling under better circumstances, but I'm standing in a diner in Montgomery, being harassed by 2 police officers who think a 90-year-old veteran is a threat." Gasps rippled through the diner. Officer Miller's face turned pale, while Simmons shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of every eye on him. On the phone, Lawson's voice hardened. "Harassed? By who? Give me names." Henry glanced at the officers, then spoke clearly. "Officer Brad Miller. Officer Todd Simmons." Lawson's tone dropped into a chilling register. "Understood. Stay where you are, Henry. I'll handle this. You won't be touched again." Henry gave a faint smile. "Thank you, General. I knew I could count on you." When he hung up the phone, the diner erupted into whispers. Linda looked at him wide-eyed, her voice shaking. "Mr. Jefferson, did you really?" Henry nodded simply. "Yes, and now we wait." Simmons tried to laugh it off, though his voice cracked. "So what? You made a phone call. What's some old general going to do from D.C.? Henry slowly returned to his booth, sat down, and picked up his fork as if nothing had happened. He looked at Simmons with calm certainty. "Son, in less than 15 minutes, you're going to learn the difference between power you pretend to have and power that actually answers the phone." 15 minutes felt like an eternity. The diner had transformed into a stage, every customer and audience member waiting for the curtain to rise. Henry Jefferson sat calmly, finishing the last bite of his grits, while Miller and Simmons shifted nervously by his table. "Still nothing," Simmons muttered, trying to sound smug, but failing as sweat beaded on his forehead. "Guess your Pentagon buddy forgot about you." Henry dabbed the corners of his mouth with a napkin, eyes steady. "Patience, son. Real power doesn't rush. It arrives when it's ready." Then the faint sound of sirens pierced the quiet morning air. Not the frantic wails of local patrol cars, but a deep, commanding chorus. A few moments later, the low rumble of engines followed, multiple vehicles rolling together in formation. Every diner patron pressed to the windows, gasps escaping as a black SUV convoy pulled up outside. Military license plates gleamed in the sunlight. Behind them, 2 state police cruisers parked, lights flashing but sirens off, escorting, not chasing. Simmons's smirk disintegrated. No way. The diner door swung open, and in walked 2 men in dark suits with earpieces, their presence radiating authority. A uniformed military officer followed close behind, his chest lined with ribbons and medals. The chatter in the diner died instantly. "Colonel Jefferson," the officer said, snapping into a salute so sharp it echoed. "General Lawson sends his regards. We're here to ensure your safety." Every jaw in the diner dropped. Linda clapped a hand over her mouth, stunned. Miller took an instinctive step back, suddenly aware of the gaping hole he and Simmons had dug for themselves. Henry stood slowly, returning the salute with a hand that still carried the steadiness of a soldier. "Thank you, son. I knew the Pentagon wouldn't let an old man eat his breakfast unprotected." The officer turned, his eyes narrowing at Miller and Simmons. "Are these the men?" The diner felt like it was about to explode. Every head in the diner turned toward the 2 trembling officers. Simmons's face flushed red, while Miller looked like the ground itself might swallow him whole. The military officer's stare was sharp enough to cut steel. "Answer me," the officer demanded, his voice steady but filled with authority. "Are you officers Brad Miller and Todd Simmons?" Neither spoke at first. Finally, Miller swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." The officer stepped closer, towering over them. "You just attempted to detain Colonel Henry Jefferson, a decorated veteran and one of this nation's most respected heroes. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Simmons tried to regain his composure, scoffing weakly. He was acting suspicious. "We were just doing our job." Henry's chuckle was low but carried across the diner. "Suspicious? Sitting with eggs and grits?" He shook his head, turning to the officer. "This is what happens when a badge is given without respect for the people it's meant to serve." The officer nodded grimly. He pulled out a phone and spoke into it quickly, confirming, "Yes, these are the 2. Then he looked back at the officers. "Internal Affairs is on its way. You'll be escorted out of here in handcuffs if necessary." Gasps filled the diner. Linda clapped her hands together, relief flooding her face. The young man in the hoodie whispered, "Finally, justice." Simmons's jaw tightened. This is ridiculous. We didn't know who he was." Henry stood tall, his 90 years vanishing in the strength of his voice. "That's the point, son. You shouldn't need to know who a man is to treat him with respect." The officer placed a firm hand on Simmons's shoulder, signaling the end of their arrogance. And for the first time since the confrontation began, the diner erupted, not with fear, but with applause. The sound of applause still echoed when the diner's bell jingled again. This time, it wasn't soldiers or officers stepping in, it was reporters. A local news crew, tipped off by one of the patrons who had been live streaming, stormed through the doors with cameras rolling. "Sir, what's happening here?" a reporter asked breathlessly, aiming her mic at Henry. Before Henry could answer, the military officer spoke sharply. "This is an official matter. Step back." But the cameras had already caught the sight of 2 nervous cops, a saluting officer, and Henry Jefferson standing tall like a living legend. The story was writing itself. Linda whispered to a customer, "The whole city's about to see this." Officer Simmons, red-faced, shoved a hand toward the camera. "Turn that off, you can't film this." The cameraman stood firm. "Actually, we can. Public place. You don't get to hide now." Miller tugged at Simmons's arm, panic setting in. "Stop it. You're making it worse." Henry, calm as ever, raised his hand. "Let them film. The truth deserves light." The reporter's eyes widened. "Colonel Jefferson, wait, you're the Henry Jefferson, the veteran who led the 92nd Infantry in Korea?" Gasps rippled through the diner again. Even some soldiers stiffened at the name. Simmons blinked in disbelief. "That's him?" Henry gave a small nod. "I don't live in the past. But sometimes the past reminds the present who it's dealing with." Before the reporter could press further, a new sound cut through the diner, the sharp squeal of police tires outside. 2 black sedans and another SUV pulled up. Out stepped stern-looking men in suits carrying folders, Internal Affairs. The room shifted. The real reckoning had arrived. The diner doors swung open, and 3 men in dark suits strode inside, their polished shoes echoing against the tiles. They carried leather folders stamped with the city seal and wore the no-nonsense expressions of men accustomed to dismantling careers. The lead investigator, a tall man with steel-grey hair, flashed his credentials. "Internal Affairs. Officers Brad Miller and Todd Simmons, you're under immediate review. Step forward." The diner went dead silent again. Miller's shoulders sagged, his lips trembling. Simmons tried to puff his chest out, but his voice shook. This is ridiculous. We were just following procedure. Procedure? The investigator snapped. You harassed a decorated veteran in public, ignored witnesses, and escalated without cause. And now half the city has seen it. Liv, he gestured toward the news cameras still rolling. Linda folded her arms, finally fearless. That's right. We all saw it. Customers nodded, their voices rising in agreement. The young man in the hoodie added, they treated him like a criminal when he was just eating breakfast. Simmons's face burned crimson. You people don't understand. Henry's voice cut him off, low and commanding. Son, stop talking before you bury yourself deeper. Sometimes silence is the only dignity left. The investigator nodded at Henry respectfully. Colonel Jefferson, on behalf of this department, I apologize for what you've endured. We'll make this right. Damn right you will, a voice muttered from the crowd, followed by murmurs of approval. Miller glanced at Simmons, his face pale. Todd, I think we're done. The investigator didn't hesitate. Officers, hand over your badges and service weapons. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation. Gasps and applause filled the diner as the two disgraced cops fumbled with their belts, reluctantly surrendering their authority. Henry watched, silent and steady, his expression unreadable. To him, this wasn't victory. It was accountability long overdue. The diner buzzed with chatter as more reporters swarmed the small-town cafe. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward, and the name Henry Jefferson suddenly trended across national news. Officer Brad Miller and Todd Simmons, once arrogant and smug, now sat stone-faced in the corner, waiting to be escorted away for questioning. But Henry wasn't smiling. His eyes were fixed on the folder that a Pentagon aide had just handed him. It was marked, Top Secret, Operation Iron Shield. Linda leaned closer, whispering nervously, Henry, what's in there? Henry's hand trembled slightly as he opened the folder. Inside were documents from the 1950s, classified missions he had led overseas. Missions that weren't just about war, but about stopping an inside betrayal within the US government itself. Good Lord, Linda gasped, scanning the first page. You saved this country more than once. Before Henry could respond, a sharp voice echoed through the diner. Mr. Jefferson, a tall man in a grey suit, stepped forward, his expression tight. We need to speak, now. The man flashed a badge, not local police, not even Pentagon. It read CIA. The reporters went wild, capturing every second. Henry, calm as ever, slid the folder shut. Seems my past has finally caught up, he said in a low, steady voice. Linda grabbed his hand. Henry, what does this mean? He looked at her, eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and strength. It means those two cops weren't just harassing me for no reason. Someone sent them. Someone who doesn't want this old soldier's truth to come out. The diner fell silent. A storm much bigger than small-town racism was about to unfold. The diner felt like the center of the universe, reporters flashing cameras, Pentagon aides whispering, townsfolk glued to every word. Henry Jefferson sat quietly, his hand resting on the folder marked Top Secret, Operation Iron Shield. Before he could speak, the diner doors swung open. A man in a sharp navy suit marched in, flanked by local officials. His face was red with anger, but his smile was forced. It was Mayor Richard Harlow. Ladies and gentlemen, Harlow boomed, trying to control the chaos, let's not blow this out of proportion. Mr. Jefferson is a respected veteran, but surely he's mistaken about these files. Henry's eyes narrowed. He had known Harlow since the man was a boy, shaking hands at parades, promising justice for all. But Henry also remembered Harlow's father, a crooked politician from decades back. The CIA agent stepped forward, lowering his voice. Mr. Jefferson, this is bigger than you know. The Harlow family name appears in those files. Gasps rippled through the diner. Henry slowly stood, his voice steady but piercing. So that's why your officers came after me, he said, locking eyes with the mayor. You weren't protecting this town. You were protecting your family's dirty history. Officer Simmons tried to protest, but reporters shoved microphones in his face. Were you ordered to target Mr. Jefferson? They demanded. The mayor's smile cracked. Sweat glistened on his forehead. He turned to the crowd, raising his hands. Don't listen to this old man. He's confused. He's stirring up trouble. But Henry's voice cut through the noise like thunder. I may be 90 years old, he said firmly, but I still know the difference between truth and lies. And I promise you all, this town's greatest betrayal is about to be exposed. The diner erupted. Cameras rolled. The mayor's shadow loomed darker than ever. The diner was no longer just a small-town cafe. It had become a courtroom, a stage, and a battlefield all at once. Reporters pressed closer. Townsfolk crammed against the windows, and the mayor's forced smile faltered under the weight of Henry Jefferson's steady gaze. "Mayor Harlow," Henry began, his deep voice commanding silence. "You can call me old, you can call me confused, but you can't erase history. I lived it. I fought for this country while your family lined their pockets." Gasps filled the diner. Linda clutched a tray against her chest, her eyes wide. The mayor's hands trembled as he slammed a fist against a table. "You have no proof," he barked. Henry calmly lifted the folder. "This," he said, "is proof." The CIA agent stepped forward, nodding. The files confirm it. Richard Harlow's father funneled weapons through black markets overseas. Men died because of it. And Mr. Jefferson here was the one who stopped the operation before it destroyed everything. A stunned silence. Cameras clicked furiously. Officer Brad Miller muttered under his breath, "So we were just pawns?" His face drained of color. The mayor's mask finally cracked. Sweat rolled down his temples. "This is slander! I'll have you arrested!" he shouted, but his voice shook with desperation. Henry took a step closer, his presence towering despite his frail frame. "You had your officers harass me because you thought I was powerless. But you forgot one thing." His voice dropped to a growl. "A soldier never forgets his mission." The diner erupted in cheers and shouts. Some clapped, others demanded the mayor resign on the spot. For the first time in decades, the truth was breaking free in Willow Springs. By nightfall, Willow's Diner wasn't just a local landmark anymore. It was on every TV screen in America. News anchors replayed the footage of 90-year-old Henry Jefferson standing tall, calling out corruption with a soldier's fire in his voice. "Hero veteran exposes mayor's family scandal," the headlines blared. From diner booth to Pentagon secrets, Henry Jefferson speaks out. Linda sat beside Henry, watching the news crews outside set up bright floodlights. Cars lined the street for blocks, people chanting his name. The once quiet veteran was now a symbol of truth. Reporters swarmed him when he stepped outside for air. "Mr. Jefferson, how long have you had these files? Did the mayor personally order police to target you? Do you fear for your safety now that this is public?" Henry adjusted his cap, eyes sharp despite his age. "I didn't fight in 2 wars just to watch my country rot from the inside," he said firmly. "This story isn't about me, it's about justice." Across town, Mayor Harlow's mansion was surrounded by flashing lights. Protesters gathered at his gate, demanding his resignation. The mayor tried to release a statement, calling Henry's claims the ramblings of an old man, but the evidence was too strong. The CIA and Pentagon had both confirmed the authenticity of the files. Brad Miller and Todd Simmons, now suspended, sat in silence watching the same news broadcast. For the first time, they realized their badges had been used as weapons for someone else's greed. Back at the diner, Linda whispered, "Henry, what happens now?" Henry's face hardened. "Now," he said, "the truth reaches Washington. The storm in Willow Springs had just become a national reckoning. The next morning, Willow Springs felt like the center of the world. News vans still lined the streets, protest signs waved outside the mayor's office, and every diner booth was filled with strangers eager to see the man who had humbled an entire system. Henry Jefferson, cane in hand, sat at his usual seat, sipping black coffee. The diner was quiet, except for the low hum of televisions replaying yesterday's events. Linda slid him a fresh plate of eggs and smiled. "Guess you're famous now." Henry chuckled softly. Never wanted fame, just wanted respect. The door swung open, and 2 uniformed men entered, not cops, but military aides in full dress. The room stilled. One of them saluted Henry. "Sir, the Secretary of Defense requests your presence in Washington. Immediately." Henry nodded, rising slowly. But before he left, he turned to the reporters crowding the doorway. His voice carried the weight of generations. "Yesterday, 2 young officers thought they could humiliate me because of my skin, my age, and my silence. But silence," he paused, "isn't weakness, it's patience. And when the truth speaks, it shakes the ground beneath the corrupt." Across town, Mayor Richard Harlow was led away in handcuffs, shouting as cameras recorded his downfall. His empire of lies had crumbled in less than 24 hours. As Henry stepped into the waiting car, Linda called out, "Be careful, Henry." He tipped his cap. "Don't worry, I've been careful my whole life. That's why I'm still here." The car pulled away, leaving the diner glowing in the morning sun. For Willow Springs, it was the end of corruption. For America, it was the rebirth of a forgotten hero. And for Henry Jefferson, it was proof that even at 90, One voice could still change the nation.